Good morning. I'm Mike Springmann. I'm not sure whether I can live up to that introduction or not. I've been accused of being many things, but being diplomatic has never been one of them. I'm also involved in public morality, and I frankly don't have her skills, talents, and abilities. Let me start off by saying I want to thank Vets and Mets for inviting me to speak here, and for her very kind and generous and gracious support. Additionally, I'd like to thank Ian Woods, who is not here. He and Barry Zwicker are publishers of Global Action, which is out there in the lobby. It's an excellent publication, and they were very kind to print one of my articles a couple of years ago on the Visas for Terrorists program. So, that said, let me go forward and give you a little bit of information about myself and go through my talk. As John said, I was a diplomat. I had worked for the Department of State. I had been assigned to the Consulate General at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I had thought it was a State Department post until I got there. And I learned that of some 20 Americans there were only 3 people, including myself, who worked for the Department of State. There might have been a couple of more, but there were only 3 people whom I knew for certainty who was not tied to the CIA or to the National Security Agency. And when I first arrived, I was greeted with open arms. Oh, Mike, we're glad you're here. Your predecessor was such a bitch. And I heard about this before leaving Washington. I had made a courtesy call on the then ambassador, Walter Cutler. It was simply asked from my side to simply say, oh, Ambassador Cutler, I'm part of your new official family. I'm going out to Jeddah. I'll be there for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Just wanted to say hello. Well, I got 45 minutes with him, and he'd spent most of the time telling me about all of the problems that they'd had with visas in Jeddah. He wouldn't say exactly what, but there were problems. It's really odd. I mean, the American ambassador is doing this for 45 minutes. He's got other things to do. He's in Washington on consultations. And I asked the desk officer, who was sort of the fellow who follows Saudi Arabia for the Department of State, and I said, what was that all about? He said, well, Cutler's just a queer duck. I said, all right. Well, once I got there, I began getting all these requests for visas for people who seem to have some peculiar backgrounds. And the way the law and the Department of State's holy book, the Foreign Affairs Manual, states that a person applying for a visa to enter the United States is that he's an intending immigrant unless and until he can prove otherwise. And the burden of proof is on him. Okay. And I look at it, well, if this is a good contact and you want to reward him, fine, yeah. And then it went on, and the guys' backgrounds were skeezier and skeezier, and I began rejecting them. I would simply say, no, you're not going to get a visa. To give you one example of what it was like for a year and a half, these 2 guys came to me, and they were Pakistanis. And they were going to a trade show in the United States. They called it the Apple Show. I said, what's the Apple Show? Well, we don't know. It's a trade show. All right. Well, where is it? Oh, it's in Detroit. And I said, okay. And I worked at the Commerce Department prior to this in the Bureau of International Commerce, and knew from experience that it was the APAA show put on by the American Automotive Parts and Accessories Association, and it was held every year in Chicago at McCormick Place. So I refused them. You don't have a good reason. I'm sorry, you've had your 2 minutes. It doesn't work. Not long after that, I get a call from Paul Arvid Tveit, TVEIT. He's a CIA clandestine service case officer, now retired in McLean, Virginia. And he said, we need visas for these guys. I said, why? Well, we're going to a trade show. It's a trade mission, we're sponsoring it. And I said, well, they can't name the trade show, and they can't name the city, and I don't think that they're going to the United States for a legitimate purpose. They're not going to get a visa, period. Unless you yourself have, under the regulations, additional information that I don't have or didn't have when I interviewed these guys. No. Okay, so then he called the chief of the consular section, Justice Stevens. And Stevens immediately issued a visa. Never got an explanation. Not too long after that, Karen Sasahara, who replaced Henry Ensher as the case officer masquerading as the political officer at the consulate, she wanted a visa for a Sudanese who was a refugee from the Sudan and was unemployed in Saudi Arabia. He had to go to Washington. And I said, why? Well, he has to go. And I said, no, he's not going to get the visa. I've interviewed him, I've refused him, and you can't give me any additional information that would persuade me that he's going to the United States and has ties strong enough to compel him to return once his business in Washington is concluded. So she goes to Justice Stevens. Justice issues the visa. I said, Justice, why? Well, national security. Well, no further explanation. So, this went on, and it went on, and it went on. I learned my predecessor, Greta Holtz, who still has a job in the State Department, had complained about this as well. And the Consul General J. Philip Freres, who I don't think worked for the Department of State, who's now retired and living in Clearwater, Florida, tried to get her thrown out of the State Department. And somebody apparently wised her up along the way, and she simply pulled in her horns and stopped complaining. I didn't. I think I should complain more. But, thank you. So this went on, and it got to the point where an expediter would come over with 20 or 30 passports from a company and say, you can issue these visas now, or you can issue them later when Jay Freres tells you to do so. This is unheard of. And I complained. I complained to Justice Stevens, I complained to Jay Freres, I complained to Stephanie Smith, who's now retired living somewhere in Florida, that, this is really strange. And by this time, Freres had ordered that I take all of the passports whose visa applications I'd approved over to the CIA base, headed by Eric Falkenbush, who's now retired and living in Findlay, Ohio, for their approval of my approval. I told this to Stephanie Smith, Counselor for Consular Affairs, and she says, well, this is really bad. When you rotate to your next assignment in Germany, go to Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington and tell them about this. All right. Well, I did that, got to D.C., and the Bureau of Consular Affairs couldn't be bothered. Now, there was an inspection team that came out to Jeddah, and they were essentially there to see how well managed and how efficient the consulate was. And the Josephine Neal, who's now retired, said to me, well, we've heard all these stories about the visa problem here. What can you tell me about it? And I didn't want to talk about it because I had been told by a contact that if you mention one word of this, you're going to be out of your ear, you'll be unemployed. And he kept on and on. Oh, we'll protect you, and he started reciting basically what I told you. And I said, all right, yeah, I'll confirm that. That's entirely correct. In fact, he knew a little bit more than I did. Then the Consul General really worked on me and says, you don't do this, you're going to get fired, period. It's really bizarre. So, after I was out of the State Department, after having been assigned to the CIA's consulate in Stuttgart, where the last two consuls general, Dave Mount and Douglas Jones, had worked for the agency and who did a number on me, telling the world that I was totally incompetent, didn't know what I was doing, and then shouldn't be made unemployed. Well, once I was out, and my Freedom of Information Act requests were being denied, and my lawsuit had been shut down and sealed as a threat to national security, I ran into the journalist Joe Trenton. And roughly at the same time, I came across a fellow connected with a local university in Washington, and with a guy who worked for another government agency who retired. And between the three of them, I learned that what this was not somebody simply paying money under the table to get a visa for people. It was a program designed to recruit fighters for the Afghan war to kill Soviets, to take them to Washington and train them in shooting things down and blowing things up. They also were brought to Washington for